The intriguing talk, as you'll see, managing the knowledge spaghetti. Hopefully we'll have time for a few questions afterwards. I know he stimulates as many questions as answers. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor John Bessant.
Well, thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, but I want to make you feel uncomfortable. Basically, we've got a big problem with this wonderful word, innovation. It's everywhere. I'll give you 30 seconds on any company website before you're going to bump into that magic word. You know the kind of thing. Innovation, driving the business. Innovation, working for the customers. Innovation, innovation, innovation. It's everywhere. And it's also in the public sector. The way we're going to get out of our crisis is very clearly, according to the top civil servants and ministers, innovation. It's the same thing. And that's the problem. It's a word that's everywhere. We know it's important. We know it's generally very positive in terms of growth. But what do we do about it? It's not enough just to have that slogan flying as top of our flagpole. We've got to do something active about it. And that's really what I want to focus on today. I want to make you feel a little uncomfortable. I want to challenge you. And then we've got some wonderful speakers throughout the day who will, I think, pick up and elaborate on how we might meet those challenges. Here's a little picture, a little map. You can all see the way it works. The horizontal axis is all about uncertainty. Don't mind what you put there. Technological change, lots of competition, this terrible financial uncertainty we have at the moment. Life is hard as you go that way. And the vertical axis, in that kind of world, how far could we get away with doing what we've always done? Now, I suggest if you put this in front of anyone and say, okay, where's your organization on this map? They're going to say something like this. Don't be stupid. It's obvious it's turbulent and changing. We can't sit still. We've got to keep moving. You might get one or two who say, we get that, but they don't. If we're smart, we can use this new technology or these newly emerging markets. We can create something new. We can write new rules of the game. But I'd like to suggest that most people, if you put the map in front of them, will be somewhere above that horizontal line. That's our aspiration. It's where we want to be. Unfortunately, for all sorts of reasons, the problem is that we can find ourselves below the line. Aspiration is not enough. We can't just simply use the slogan. We've got to actively organize and manage innovation if it's going to work for us. So what I want to do this morning, very briefly, is just to throw down a few challenges. I could, as Nick said, spend all day, but I promise you I won't. I'm going to throw 3 challenges at you and hopefully stimulate some thoughts about them, which we can explore during the rest of the day. 3 challenges. The first is the Spengler challenge, the second, the spaghetti challenge, and the third, the Sappho challenge. Don't worry if they all sound rather meaningless, I will explain them. So if I start with the Spengler challenge. Very simply, when did you last use your Spengler? I think you've all got one. Some of you may have touched yours recently. I see a sea of very worried faces. I'll make life easier for you. If I said, when did you last use your Hoover, or perhaps these days your Dyson, your vacuum cleaner? Well, here's a useless fact you can take away. Mr. J. Murray Spengler invented and patented the electric vacuum suction sweeper. Nobody's ever heard of him. But if I said the word sewing machine, I think a name probably just dropped into your heads, which was? Singer. All together now. Unfortunately, you're all wrong. It wasn't Mr. Singer. It was a chap called Elias Howe who invented the sewing machine, and he went bankrupt. What Mr. Singer very cleverly did was buy that business and grow it. Now, the point of those 2 examples is to illustrate a key point, which Anne has already referred to. Innovation is not like the cartoons. That wonderful moment, bing, light bulb flashes on, that's invention. That's hugely important. It's a great idea. But ideas on their own are not enough. There's much more to innovation than just ideas. Here's some famous examples of inventions, bright ideas, all in the US Patent Office, and not many of them in the streets outside. The famous gas-filled umbrella idea, for example. The musical flamethrower. A gadget here where you can go duck hunting, you can stay dry, you can't breathe, which is its one major drawback. I like this one. It keeps your unborn baby entertained for 9 months. A Walkman for the fetus. But my star prize would go to the genius who wanted the world to have the cheese-flavored cigarette. Now, we laugh, and we've all seen examples of wacky inventions, but they underline this key and rather serious point. Basically, what goes on in our heads when we think about something is going to shape what we do about it. Our mental model is going to shape how we organize and manage what we pay attention to. So we need to start with our mental model of what we think innovation is. And if we think it is just bright ideas, flashes of inspiration, great, but then that's all we'll pay attention to. And it's fairly clear that that's not enough to guarantee successful innovation. So what I'd like to do is just elaborate the Spengler challenge and challenge you a little bit. How do we think about innovation? And it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. There's nothing wrong at all with invention. Bright ideas are wonderful things. But on their own, it's like a jigsaw puzzle with only one piece. Not a very good guide to what the picture is about. So what we really need to do is to take some of those partial pieces, partial models of innovation, start putting them together to build and update a coherent picture. Here's a few examples of what I mean. Knowledge. We all talk about knowledge and innovation. Of course we do. We do research and development because that creates new knowledge and that creates opportunity. Wonderful. So that's why we invest in research, why it's very important to do so. But knowledge on its own may not be enough. Remember Mr. Emerson, build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. And of course it doesn't. There's a lot of bankrupt mousetrap salesmen around. The problem is we need to think about the market side. Okay, so let's bring that in the equation. Listen to the voice of the customer. Let that demand signal pull the innovation through. Necessity is the mother of invention. Very good principle. Absolutely right. We teach it at the business school. Except, what about those situations when the market doesn't know what it wants? Lovely Henry Ford quote. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses. Sometimes you need more than that. Steve Jobs, one of his great gifts was actually pushing the market where it didn't know it wanted to go. That was a huge part of Apple's success and very much part of his philosophy. So nothing wrong with knowledge push or market pull. Start putting them together and we begin to have the basis for effective management of innovation. Here's a few more. Is it always about technology, high technology, gadgets, computers, robots? I'm an engineer. I love those things. But the evidence is clear. Innovation is often about little things and very often about social and organizational arrangements as much as it is about physical technology. Radical change. Does it always have to be huge leaps? Well, no. Lovely example Anne gave of the hair grip. Small change can revolutionize things. Little things matter. I could bore you with the economics. Most innovation, most of the time, is doing what we do a bit better. It adds up. But what do we pay attention to? Do we just manage the glamorous soundbite stuff? Or are we actually aware that most innovation is much more incremental, but it adds up? What do we manage? What do we pay attention to? One of my big hobby horses, who does it? Any organization will have one or two people at least who are licensed to innovate, a bit like James Bond. You might call them research and development or new business or new products. That's great. They're the ones who we expect to innovate. But what about the rest? Every human being is fitted, standard equipment, with the ability to find and solve problems in a creative fashion. We're all innovators. So by definition, anyone in an organization, whatever it does, could contribute to its innovation efforts. Do we do that? Do we pay attention to that? Do we reward it? Do we mobilize that? That's a key question. And very much the theme for today, innovation is not a solo act. We know from decades or centuries now of research that innovation is a multiplayer game. It's all about connections and collaboration, and I'll come back to that theme. So there's the Spengler challenge. When we think of innovation, when you think of innovation, what's in your head? Is it a simplistic view, or have we got a 21st century jigsaw puzzle with a rich and updating picture? That's challenge number one. Challenge number two, the spaghetti challenge. Now, spaghetti. You're smart people, you already know that innovation isn't just like that cartoon moment. That actually we have to make things happen. As Anne again said, innovation is a process. And typically, if you see pictures of it, it has this kind of funneling arrow shape to it. And in our organizations, we know a lot, hopefully, because that's what I teach, but we know a lot about how we might build structures that help this process to happen. Can't guarantee success, but you can certainly stack the deck in your favor. We know a lot about effective management of innovation. And typically, it would describe a process that looks something like that, which is fine. It gives me something to teach. It gives organizations something to work with. But it's a map. The reality is not the same thing. Just like a map is not the place, it's a representation. These models help us think, but we shouldn't forget what's underneath them. And the reality of innovation is that it doesn't happen like that. It happens like that. Now, don't worry if you can't see the detail. That's quite deliberate. I just want you to see the spaghetti, because that's what innovation really is. Knowledge spaghetti. It's technical knowledge, market knowledge, legal knowledge, financial knowledge, all sorts of different bits of knowledge that all sorts of different people have that we weave together in some way to create value. That's innovation. We can superimpose on this all sorts of structures, as long as we don't forget that what's underneath it is knowledge spaghetti, and our challenge is managing that spaghetti to create value. Now, that becomes really important and underlines today's conference, because in the 21st century, we've got rather a lot of knowledge to work with. We don't actually know how much technical knowledge is around in the world today. It's just a huge amount. The OECD estimates suggest that between $500 and $700 billion is spent every year in creating new knowledge. Public and private sector research and development around the world, between $500 and $700 billion a year, new stuff coming on stream. Now just think about that. That's a vast tidal wave of new knowledge every year. And it really raises the question for any organization, not just do we do enough in terms of how much knowledge we create, what research do we do, but have we any idea what's out there that we could make use of? And out there is no longer the usual places. It's global now. Tiny countries like Taiwan or Singapore are major players in this new knowledge economy. Have we any idea what's going on there? And the demand side, markets. Again, we need to understand markets if we're going to create products and services people want. We need to do research on them. We need knowledge. Trouble is, there's a lot of people in the world, something like 7 billion. And realistically, we don't know much about 6 billion of them. Most of our market research and our market understanding is about markets close to home, markets we're familiar with. But most of the growth is coming, and certainly most of the people, in the emerging markets. And no longer just China and India and Brazil. Behind them are the other countries. Africa is going to explode in the next 20 years in terms of being a major marketplace. Do we understand? Do we have knowledge around that? And if that challenge isn't enough, think of the virtual world. The third largest country, you might like to reflect, the third largest country in the world by population at the moment, that's the one after China and India, is Facebook. Facebook, with 800 million people, it's a pretty big country. Now, it may seem irrelevant, but I wouldn't, if I were in music or media or fields like that, I wouldn't disregard Facebook. Undoubtedly, the innovation dynamics of what goes on there are shaping the way those industries develop. So we've got a huge knowledge challenge in terms of this spaghetti. And the term that's very widely used, and you may well have come across it, it kind of underpins today's conference, is a term called open innovation. And open innovation, really, I could summarize very simply. In a world that has so much knowledge out there, even the largest organization has to say, not all the smart guys work for us. And as soon as you say that, it changes the game. You've still got to do your own homework. It's still important to do your own research of markets and technologies, but it's more than that. It's now about, how do I make connections? How do I collaborate? That's the key issue today. And all sorts of organizations are playing with this idea and developing very successful strategies from it. These are just a few samples. The one at the top, Proctor Gamble. They're the one that perhaps have been most written about in this field. They've been doing it for about 10 years. They changed their program in 1999 from what used to be a conventional research and develop program, about $3 billion a year spent, 8,000 people in white coats around the world, lots more market researchers, very conventional business model. They flipped from research and develop to what they've called connect and develop. And it's transformed the fortunes of the company. Very simple message from the chief executive in 1999. In the future, we will get 50%, half of our innovations from outside. We have no idea where, but that's what we'll do. And over the last 10 years, they've been working out how to do that with some spectacular successes. I don't have time to go into detail. Let me give you one very simple example, fairly small and trivial, but it underlines this change of attitude. At the back there, you can see perhaps Pringles potato crisps, and you all know Pringles. Imagine somebody in a marketing meeting Friday afternoon in Procter Gamble. Wouldn't it be a good idea if we could print a message on Pringles? Yes, sounds a good idea. Let's do that. Well, we could have a Harry Potter tie-in, or we could have Olympic special edition Pringles. Wouldn't that be great? And lots of heads nodding. And then the difficult question, how do we do it? It's not even a flat shape to begin with. And you can imagine after a lot of head scratching, they'd probably park the idea. In the old world, that would be true. But in a company which says, not all the smart guys work for us, we don't know, but maybe somebody out there does. Now, one of the many things they've done is make use of the internet. And they use a platform which, if you're not familiar with yet, I'd recommend you take a look at, a platform called Innocentive.com. And Innocentive.com is a very simple idea. It's eBay for innovation. It's a marketplace. On the one hand, you have seekers, and as the name suggests, they're looking for a solution to a problem. Does anybody know how to print on Pringles? And the other side of the marketplace are solvers. I think I do. And just like eBay, anybody can play. It could be a 9-year-old schoolboy, 90-year-old retired engineer, anybody in between. That's the beauty of the model. So, does anybody know how to print on Pringles? And up popped a little bakery in Bologna, in Italy. We're not sure, but you might be interested. We developed an edible ink and a little inkjet nozzle printer so we could spray pictures and messages onto birthday cakes. It's very popular in Bologna. The result, making the connection, you can now get printed Pringles. So if you want into Somerset printed Pringles, I can give you the address of the people. It's a trivial example, but it underpins this revolution that is still going on in the world of open innovation. Think about smartphones. Now, the iPhone and the other things, wonderful pieces of phone technology, but the real impact they've had is not to do with the phone. It's to do with the hundreds of thousands of application developers, often small businesses, creating stuff that runs on the platform. It's opened it up. Not all the smart guys work for Apple. Apple have spread the net more widely. Lego, Ordnance Survey, BBC, hundreds of organizations are experimenting with effectively finding ways to make connections. This picture in the middle is a report I wrote. I'll give you a website at the end if you're interested in more detail. But essentially, there's a revolution going on around this, which is about today's theme, making connections. But it doesn't happen by accident. Back again, it's a management challenge. We've got to do something. First of all, we have to recognize just how much of a multiplayer game it is. This is not just talking to our neighbors anymore. Collaboration now we have to think of on a very broad canvas. It means we have to stop worrying about knowledge creation per se and think about knowledge flow, knowledge trading, knowledge in and out of our organizations. That's something perhaps that's very different between this century and the last. For large organizations, it's also a model inside. Does Procter Gamble know what it knows? That's been one of the revelations to them. With a global company and hundreds of thousands of people actually mobilizing the spaghetti more effectively inside the organization, hugely important. Mobilizing employee knowledge. Orange, France Telecom own Orange, the phone company, have lots of call centers. They have a platform called Idée Click. And it's simply an employee suggestion scheme spread across that IT-based company. And they get something like 30,000 people a day chipping in their ideas. Does Orange know what it knows? Well, it knows a lot more now. And the result is over the past 5 years, they've saved about €1 billion. Mostly small innovations, but they add up, spreading the net. It's also not always about pushing frontiers. Something else we need to reflect. Often innovation is about something that's well known here, but really useful if you move it across boundaries. This guy understood that. I don't know if you recognize him. This is, in fact, Thomas Edison. Great name. When you talk about innovation, pretty soon his name comes up. A genius. Gave the world, as you see there, the gramophone, the electric light, the the telegraph. The electric chair was one of his many contributions to society. But Edison's gift was two things. First of all, he was brilliant at public relations. So much of the first impressions we get of Edison are pictures like this. The lone genius, this wonderful thinker who somehow gave the world so much. So he was good at PR. But actually, that PR story isn't the reality. What he was really good at was he understood open innovation long before it became fashionable. What he did in his invention factory in New Jersey was promise the world a new idea every week, a breakthrough every 6 months. And he delivered on that, not because of being a lone genius, but because he recruited people from all sorts of different sectors. Bright young engineers from the food industry, the new car industry, the gun industry, the telegraph industry, people from different worlds. Put them all in one office working together, so it must have smelt terrible, all those guys working and sleeping and eating together. But what it was essentially a creative hothouse. And it wasn't always pushing the frontiers of ideas so much as making connections. Today's theme again. So we have to recognize that there's a huge amount we can do even with what's called recombinant innovation. But the big challenge we have is how to make all of this happen. What sorts of mechanisms will we have? Things like today, to make connections. Who are the brokers? Are they online brokers? Are they organizations? How do we build bridges? How do we spread knowledge around? And how do we deal with some of the challenges underneath all of this knowledge flow, like in the realm of intellectual property? Now, it would be nice to stand here and say, well, yes, we've done the research, we have the answers. We don't. These are very much the frontier challenges, but also the source of great opportunities. So, I've promised 3 challenges. I'm looking at my watch. I've got time for one more. We've looked at the Spengler challenge very briefly, and we've briefly looked at the spaghetti challenge. Third challenge, the Sappho challenge. And you can relax, I'm not going to quote ancient Greek poetry to you. Sappho challenge I'll express with another question. Would you like to make some money? Basically, this is a recipe for making quite a lot of money very quickly. About $500,000 every month, no risk, you don't need an MBA, you don't need much in the way of capital, you don't even need many people. If that sounds interesting, this is how you do it. You go into the T-shirt business. This is in fact a company called threadless.com, and they're a late entrant to a big business, T-shirts. 2 problems if you want to be in the T-shirt business. Number 1, everybody likes something different on their T-shirt. Very few people like a plain white T-shirt. We want pictures and slogans and things that express ourselves. And there's your first problem. If you want to be in the T-shirt business, you need an army of designers creating those designs. And there is the second problem as well. Because you can't make one design for everybody. Sorry, you can't make each individual design. What you need to do is know which ones will be popular and make those. And if you don't have an army of market researchers, you risk having a huge pile of unsold T-shirts. So there's Threadless, new entrant. How do they deal with the challenge? Challenge number 1, design. Well, we could employ an army of designers, but we won't employ any. We'll throw that problem back to the marketplace. So it's an online business. Every week they run a competition. Anybody can play. You could spend the rest of the morning designing a T-shirt and submit it to their website. And they display all the designs, and there you have high variety of interesting designs. Solves the first problem, but you still have the problem which ones to make. Well, we could employ an army of researchers, but we won't bother. We won't employ any. We'll put that problem to the market as well. And so on the website, for each design, you have a little voting scheme. There's the picture. I like that. I'll give that 5 points. I don't like that much. I'll give it 2. And a little box right in the corner here. I like it so much. Tick. I'd buy it. And you see the beautiful simplicity of the business model. I imagine it was a few beers that got these guys started. That's why they're smiling. But basically, the business works. They get about 800 ideas every week, and they choose the best 4. And they know which the best 4 are because the marketplace has told them. Then they push the button and start making reasonable volumes, 50, 60,000. Start putting some numbers into that. Imagine $10, $15 a T-shirt. The lucky designers, 4 of them, get $2,000 each. That means, if you can do the numbers, there's quite a lot left over to put a smile on their faces. $18 million sales, a 35% margin, less than 20 people, whole lot of fun. Now, before you all start rushing for the exits and thinking we'll start a T-shirt business, of course, this is a model which is very easy to copy, and Threadless, in the 10 years they've been running this kind of thing, have moved well beyond that. But I use it as a very trivial introduction to the Sappho Challenge, because the Sappho Challenge is all about working with users. Rather than seeing the market as somehow a place at which you push things, a place which is a sort of passive consumer, markets are full of people who have ideas, desires, and wishes. We're all innovators. And what Threadless have picked up on, and where the Sappho frontier lies, is if we could work with users, co-creation, which I notice is one of the themes of one of the workshops later on. This idea of co-creation with users opens up significant opportunities to source ideas and also to spread and diffuse the things we create because they've been created by people who want to consume them. That was a trivial example. A less trivial one, I won't go into detail. Look at Lego. Lego, I think you all know the toy company, wonderfully successful, has transformed itself. It had a huge crisis in 2002. The patents ran out, a lot of competition from computer games, very high cost base in Denmark. Lego, lots of problems, have really pulled themselves out. They had their best ever year last year. But it's a business which is not simply about designers in Denmark creating lovely things which you then go to the shops and buy. You can still stay with that model, but they've opened this huge new parallel field in which they're partnered with their customers. And their customers are kids. Basically, if you go on Lego's website, Lego Factory, there are design tools where kids can work with tools on the net, designed for them, and they can design their own robot or dinosaur. Their imagination can come into play. And then Lego say, okay, give us your design, we'll work out which bricks and other things you need, we'll generate some building instructions, you can even design the box, and then we'll send it back to you. So you can create your own toy. What's very interesting is that's been so successful, they've now realized some kid designers are really good and other kids like their designs. So Lego now have a system which basically says to those successful designers, if lots of other kids buy your design, we'll share the royalties. So Lego no longer have just designers in Denmark, they also have an army of designers worldwide of children. That's the idea of co-creation. And there are lots of examples of this. The limit, of course, to that frontier is some of the technologies we now have around design and manufacture mean that you could, for about $2,000, buy a thing called a Make-O-Matic. And a Make-O-Matic is a little box which will basically make things. You might want to make a little ring, or you think you've designed a little piece of sculpture you'd like to put on your coffee table. Anything you could imagine, you can create it as a computer design model, plug that into the Make-O-Matic, which you paid $2,000 for, chips away using some 3D printing technology, and there's the thing that you have designed. That's where the frontier's moving. So in a sense, this artificial divide between creators and consumers is disappearing. And it's a great source of opportunity. That's the Sappho Challenge. Sappho Challenge takes its name from a project, a very successful one done right back in the 70s at Sussex University, but repeated many, many times since. How do we know how to manage innovation? Well, let's take an innovation and find a couple of organizations who launched it. One succeeded and one failed. Since the innovation's the same, it was the way they managed it which differed. Can we learn from that? It's a very neat methodology. And that method has been applied many, many times, and we've learned a lot about the management challenge in innovation. And one of the key lessons, right back to the 70s, keeps coming back: users matter. We can't ignore users, we certainly can't ignore markets and understanding market needs, but actually we could co-create with them. Users have never been passive. Lots of research underlines this. Lots of people, farmers for example, are constantly modifying and adapting what they have. If you think about a farmer in the old days of motor cars, farmer would buy a car, Model T Ford, let's say, take it back to the farm, but then say, well, this is all right, but you know, I never use the back seats. If I strip them out, I could put a pig in there and I could take the pig to market. Or, if I get my welding torch and cut that back bit off, I never use that, I've got a little truck I can put straw bales in and take it out to the cattle. Farmers do this all the time. Farmers are natural improvisers. They're user innovators. And in fact, the pickup truck, which is so much a staple of the car industry these days, was not designed in Detroit. It was basically Detroit car manufacturers driving past Midwestern farms and seeing all these farmer innovations. There's something here that we don't make, we could. It's classically what's called user-led innovation. And particularly in services, that's a real opportunity. We all consume services. I guess we're not always happy with them. In our minds, we often say, oh, that was all right, but if only they would do this, or why can't they do that? You're starting an innovation process in your head. And tapping into that is a rich source of possibility. The man who's done so much of the work on this is a man called Eric von Hippel at MIT. He has a lovely book, which you can download for free. He practices what he preaches. But his book is called Democratization of Innovation. I think it's a real challenge. Who are the innovators? And the real argument in that is we could all be so. What also comes out of that, of course, is what he calls extreme users. People at the edge, people whose user needs today are not those of the mainstream. They're right out at the fringe. We could dismiss them and say that's the lunatic fringe. Or we could say, their needs today may be mainstream tomorrow. Low-cost airline business is very interesting to look at. Low-cost airlines was not about new competitors head-to-head with the established airlines. It was basically new players like EasyJet and Ryanair saying, who's at the edge? Who are extreme users who, by virtue of their finances, can't afford to fly? Can we work with them and create with them a model which can meet those needs? Well, yes, you can, but it doesn't stay over there. What's called disruptive innovation is when things that happen over there migrate center stage and upset the apple cart, which is very much what happened with low-cost airlines. And a little thought, look at what's going on in the emerging world. Remember, most of the people are there, but they don't have as much money as us, and their lifestyles are very different. Solving their problems, you could say that's their problems. But if people come up with solutions for low-cost, reliable healthcare, or low-cost, reliable transportation, are they going to stay over there? Or is there an opportunity for them to migrate here? That's to say, an opportunity for people who work there, a real threat for established players here. So in many ways, this Sappho challenge brings in some more elements of real challenge around innovation for us in terms of how we organize and manage it. So let me draw to a close. I don't think anyone would be here if you didn't agree that innovation matters. It's about survival sometimes. It's certainly about growth. Fine. But it's not going to happen by accident. We can't simply have the slogan. We have to actively organize and manage it. In innovation studies, we talk about, a nice business school term, dynamic capability. And all that really means is it's not just about learning to do something once and ticking the box. In a changing world, the turbulent right-hand side of my first picture, you have to not only say, how do we manage innovation, but is it the right model still for this 21st century? And that really means we have to keep rethinking our approaches, and particularly asking questions like, of the things we do, what should we do more of, because they still work? What should we do less of, or even stop? They worked in the past, but maybe those approaches don't work anymore. And what new things do we need to learn to do? Particularly, I suggest, around this collaboration spaghetti world. So we need to learn new tricks. I'll leave my last word then to this gentleman, all about learning. You might recognize Winnie the Pooh from the pre-Walt Disney days. First page, a really powerful quotation. Here you have Edward Bear, Winnie the Pooh's proper name, coming downstairs now, bump, 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 on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin, which is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs, except that sometimes he feels there really is another way, if only he could stop bumping for a moment to think of it. It's brilliant. And that's the real challenge we have. Of course we want to change in our organizations. We want to make them better. Most of the time, though, we're fighting fires and bumping our heads in different ways. The beauty of a day like today is you're offline. You have a chance not to bump your heads, to allow some new stuff, some new thoughts, some new challenges, some new connections. So I hope you have a great day. If you're interested in some of the things I've talked about, there's some resources that you can tap into. I'd be happy to also if you email me. But basically, I hope that's given you at least a frame for what I believe is the big challenge. Innovation management, perhaps more than anything else, is about making connections. Thank you very much.